Chapter 12. I went to bed that night, worried about Dad and worried that he wouldn't be able to make the climb we'd traveled all this way for. But when I woke up the next morning, Dad was peering out the window of our hotel room. He must have heard me wrestling with my sleeping bag. "Hey, little Jay," he said, sounding surprisingly chipper. "Want to climb today?" I was so happy that he was feeling better and that all our hard work to get here hadn't been for nothing. I practically jumped out of bed. I am so ready. Karen was already up too. "But Paul, how do you feel?" He waved off her concerns about his sinuses. "The weather's good, but that can change fast. We need to go now." I knew that Dad was doing this for me, but I trusted him when he said he felt good enough to climb. So I pulled on my thermal underwear and then the rest of my gear. After a Russian breakfast of bread, cheese, scrambled eggs, oatmeal, and tea, we headed for Elbrus. At its base, there was an old Soviet-style ski resort with a dilapidated tram to get skiers and snowboarders up to the slopes. We boarded the tram and rode from 7,700 feet to 11,500 feet. No one walked this hill, and it was the norm for climbers to start from the top of the tram. When we got off, Karen looked at the map. "It's a 1,200-foot climb to Barrels Camp from here." Barrels was the base camp from where we'd start our climb to the summit. Base camp is exactly that, a base of operations. "There's the chairlift," Dad said, pointing. Most of the people who were on the tram with us headed straight for the lift, but there were other sightseers or skiers. Climbers skipped the chairlift and started hiking from the top of the tram. My insides were doing handsprings as I put on crampons and made sure my ice axe was handy for an emergency. Karen chuckled to me. "You probably don't need those yet." I am not going to be one of those unprepared guys. Dad waved me forward. "Then lead on." About an hour and a half later, we reached the Barrels camp. I thought Barrels was a pretty funny name for a base camp until I saw it. The camp was literally made of barrels. Old metal fuel barrels painted red and lying on their sides, converted into buildings. Each building was a little longer than a boxcar, with a ceiling maybe 10 feet tall in the center. "Hey, check this out." I stepped inside one. It had windows, 6 bunk beds with mattresses and pillows, an electric heater, outlets, and lights. We could have paid to stay in one of the barrel buildings ourselves that night, but we had planned to save the money and set up camp ourselves. Plus, we weren't nearly ready to stop for the day. As we hiked past, I saw a bunch of kids getting off the chair lift, carrying snowboards, and then climbing into snowcats, truck-sized vehicles that could carry 10 or 12 people and were meant to drive on snow. "Must be some kind of summer camp, I guess," Karen said. "Elbrus is a year-round ski area." The thought of screaming down the mountain jumped into my head. I could so ski that. "Why didn't we bring our skis?" I asked. "You know the deal," Dad said. "We came to climb a mountain, not ski. We travel light and fast." "We could have slept in the barrels and carried skis instead of hauling camping gear," I answered. "Sorry, Jordan. Maybe on another mountain," he answered. "Which one? Everest? That would be totally cool," I said. I read about one guy who skied down it. I was getting crazy excited. "Or maybe Vinson in Antarctica. There's plenty of snow there. Or Denali in Alaska." Karen interrupted. "Easy. Let's just get up this mountain first." I dropped it then. Plus, I could tell Dad still felt lousy. His smile had disappeared, and there were circles below his eyes. But he was never one to give up easily. We moved on. I was the leader again. There was no way I could get us lost on Elbrus. It was a big, open, snowy mountain. There was no scrambling through jungles like at the beginning of Kilimanjaro. The top of Elbrus was almost 1,000 feet lower in elevation than Kili, but more challenging because of all the snowfall it received. The weather could get seriously nasty. As the lead, my job was to set a steady pace. I climbed hard and fast. I was a little short of breath from the altitude, but I'd come for an adventure. Then I spotted something reflecting sunlight on the side of a mountain. I zeroed in on the metal roof of a 2-story building. As we got closer, I saw that it was another camp. The place could easily sleep 30 or 40 people, and it looked to have a kitchen inside too. We paused to try to figure out what to do next. We could spend the night there, but we had the energy to go farther. Dad checked the map. It looks like a lot of climbers summit from the Pastukova Rocks, he said. Let's camp there. The Pastukova Rocks are the highest rocky outcrop on a lava ridge running down the mountain and a landmark for climbers. Karen's fingers trace the route upward. They're at 15,000 feet. We're only at 12,000 feet. 12,500 feet now. We should acclimatize first, especially with the way you feel. The altitude was putting extra pressure on Dad's sinuses, and one of his molars had started to hurt too. I'll get by. We're running out of daylight. I'm game for going to the rocks and seeing how we feel, he said. I took 2 steps forward. I'm not breathing too hard. Let's go. No headache or nausea? Karen asked me. None. Karen frowned, not completely convinced Dad was up for it. Okay, we can keep going, but only on the condition that we come back down if anyone has altitude problems. Agreed? Dad and I nodded, and we set off. He set the pace now because he was moving slower than usual. We stopped to rest often so he could gather himself. We took a long switchback to the right a few hundred yards, to the left several hundred more, then to the right again. It was exhausting for me. I couldn't imagine how my dad was handling it when he was in such pain. So I was relieved, for his sake, more than mine, to see a line of boulders strewn across the mountains, as if they'd spilled out of a giant's pocket, the Pastukova Rocks. Dad sat down on a flat rock, his elbows on his knees, as he cradled his head in his hands once more. I removed his pack one arm at a time and got out his water bottle. He looked up at me as I handed it to him. Thanks, J-Man. He'd called me J-Man instead of Little J, my usual nickname. I hope that meant he saw that I was growing up. You can rest, I told him, the new nickname giving me a sudden sense of responsibility. Karen and I will make camp and fix something to eat. Karen and I found a small dirt clearing so we didn't have to set up on rocks or snow. I was excited to try out my new tent from Martha Stewart. As soon as it was ready, I inflated Dad's thermarest pad and rolled a jacket into a pillow. He crawled in to lie down, and I spread his sleeping bag over him. It was kind of nice taking care of him for once, instead of being the one everyone else took care of. Karen made some hot tea, soup, and sandwiches. As soon as the sun went down, the cold bit right through my jacket. I crawled into my down bag, zipped it all the way to my chin, and pulled the hood over my head. I'd camped in snow back home, but not at 15,000 feet. I had learned that the higher you go and the lower the air pressure, the colder it gets. For every 1,000 feet of elevation, the temperature drops about 5.5 degrees. But somehow, even with the biting cold seeping through our tent, I managed to fall asleep. Karen prepared everything for the morning so our packs would be ready to go. Until 3 a.m., that is. The deafening noise of an engine sounded like it was coming straight through our tent. Dad pulled himself out of the tent. Hey, what are you doing? I peered through the tent flap and watched a group of 10 or so Japanese climbers get out of a snowcat and begin to put on crampons. They let Dad know that they were going to climb the summit. Dad crawled back into the tent. Well, is everyone else awake now? Oh, yes, Karen answered. I nodded, yawning. Then we might as well get up, Dad said. How's your tooth? Karen asked him. I'll live. I dressed as best as I could without getting out of my cozy bag, but it was hard moving fast with cold hands. Our water had frozen too, so Karen had to melt it onto the camp stove to make hot cocoa and oatmeal. I wrapped my fingers around the cup to warm them. When we were ready to start climbing, we switched on our headlamps and headed for the summit. It was 4 a.m. The temperature was about 0, and the snow was frozen solid. I had to fight to sink my crampons into it to get a good foothold and avoid slipping on the rock-hard ice. We had been charging full steam ahead for a couple of hours when suddenly my dad stopped and leaned forward, putting his weight onto his climbing poles. "My head's killing me," he said. Dad never complained. Hearing him say that made me worry. I shone the light from my headlamp on his face. "Will you be okay?" "I'll survive," he said. "I just need to rest a minute." We were so close that I hated the thought of turning back now. Even so, I'd do it in a heartbeat if that was what my dad needed. "We came this far," Karen added. "I know you'll make it. We'll go at your pace. We've got plenty of time." Just ahead of us, I watched climbers wind up the hill. "Is that the Japanese team?" I asked. "Yes, and they left an hour before we did," Karen added. "They're not exactly setting speed records." Dad sipped from the bottle carried inside his down jacket to keep it from freezing and started out again, seeming a little stronger. The first rays of morning light had changed the colors on the horizon ever so slightly. Moments later, the sun burst over the mountains, casting the shadow of Elbrus across the entire landscape. The scenery was incredible, total white everywhere we looked. Colored markers indicated the best route for the monotonous switchbacks. We trudged on and on. The higher we went, the farther away the summit looked. Then, when we were within 50 yards of the Japanese group, we reached the saddle, or gap, between Elbrus's two summits. We were going for the highest of the two. "Take a break and drink lots of water," Dad said. I took a few sips, planning to save the rest for later. "Do it now. Dehydration can be worse than not having enough oxygen." Skeptical, I wrinkled my brow. "No way." He gritted his teeth at me the way he does when he scolds. "Less air pressure means less humidity and more evaporation from your skin and lungs. You've got to drink more water to keep your body working. And we need to eat." Karen pulled out 3 energy bars, 3 apples, and her famous peanut butter cookies. We always carried them on hikes because they provided protein and sugar for energy, and they were really good. I lay in the snow, absorbing the sun's warmth while munching on an apple. One of the Japanese climbers was headed back down the mountain. "I'm surprised they let him go alone," Dad said. "Not a strong team like us," I said through a mouthful of apple. After our break, we continued along a steeper, icier, narrower ridge toward the west summit. As we climbed, the lower air pressure at high altitude really started messing with me. I was breathing hard, trying to get more air to send oxygen to my legs. My feet were like cinder blocks. I lifted one and pushed it forward a few inches, dropped it, and waited a few seconds before repeating with the other. "Jordan, you're not going to make it taking heavy steps like that," Karen said. Dad reached for my hand to pull me up. "Come on, J-Man. This is serious stuff. Stop moving and the cold will kill you. It's called hypothermia."